Ever wanted to know how to create cool underwater rocks? Keep watching. My name is Noreen and I create watercolor paintings, tutorials, and art supply reviews. Today I'll be showing you how to paint these river rocks. First, let's go over the basic process. We'll start with a background wash. A neutral earth tone is a good choice here. Then sketch out your rock shapes. Outline the shapes with a mid-tone and soften the edges with a clean, wet brush. Glaze over the rocks with a light wash of different colors. Then we'll glaze in the shadows and facets of the rocks. Add in refracted light in the water with white gouache and soften them out. Then refine any outlines and light lines as needed. Finally, we'll glaze over the whole thing with a very light bluish tinted wash. I like to start every painting with a basic wash for the background. It gives you a good starting point while adding dimension and depth. For something like this, I like to use the wet in wet method. Start by wetting the whole sheet. I like to just spray the page and then spread the water around with a mop brush. All materials I'm using here will be in the description below, along with links to where you can get them. Next, drop in diluted color randomly and let it all dry. I like doing this because it will help inspire some randomness when we sketch in the shapes in the next step. Let this dry before moving on. Now we'll sketch out the rock shapes. I like to use watercolor pencil as it will melt away when I add paint on top of it. I generally use either a blue or a red pencil depending on the color scheme. This will be a cooler color scheme, so I'm going to go with the blue. Try not to make them all the same shape. Some can be triangular, some can be squarish, long, round, whatever. Have fun and be free about this. Make sure to add small pebbles in the wider spaces between the larger rocks. Now we're going to outline the rocks with a mid-tone, such as brown or gray. I like to soften the edges a bit with a clean, wet brush. The brush should be wet but not dripping. By the time you finish outlining all the rocks, the corner you started in should be dry enough to move on to the next step without drying. If not, just wait a few minutes or dry it with a small travel dryer on the cool setting. Now I'm going to glaze over the rocks with different light washes of color. I like to use blue, green, yellow, and brown. The color shouldn't be too concentrated here, you just want to tint them slightly. Otherwise, it'll come out looking a bit unrealistic and too colorful. However, if that's the style you're going for, then by all means use as much color as you like. You can even leave some of the base color to show through. Let this glaze dry before moving on. Next, we'll glaze in a neutral tone such as Payne's Gray for shadows. Like before, I like to soften the inside edges with a clean, wet brush. Again, the brush should be wet but not dripping. I like to create facets on some of the rocks rather than having them all be smooth and round. You can use the corners of the rocks as a guide. Try to maintain your light source here. Just pick a direction and make sure all your shadows are on the same side of each rock. For instance, mine will be coming from the top of the page, and I like to have shadows facing the center sometimes, so that's what I'll be doing here. Now I'll be using white gouache to add in the refracted light under the water. This is zinc white from Winsor Newton. It's not as opaque as the titanium white, so it will dry a bit more translucent, which will be the right effect for this refracted light in the water. If you don't have this, or you only have the titanium white, feel free to just dilute it with water and it'll be fine. Try not to be too uniform with this since you want to make it look natural. If you look at pictures of things underwater, you'll see they kind of squiggle out in a circular shape with loose wavy lines. Soften the edges as you go. We can scrub it a bit more later too for a neat highlighting effect. Take your time with this and zone out. This can be a really relaxing painting process. We're almost done. In this step, take a look at the painting and see where you'd like to add more definition. I like to go over the areas between the rocks and redefine some of the smaller pebbles. I might scrub at the gouache lines a bit as well. It's totally up to you. Finally, I like to put a very light bluish tinted wash over the whole thing to really give it that underwater look. This will also help soften the harsh whiteness of the gouache and unify the whole piece. This kind of painting is so refreshing for me because it's something I can work on while listening to a podcast or an audiobook, and I can just zone out working on each little rock. It doesn't have to look any certain way, so there's a lot of freedom to be creative and mess around. It also uses a lot of different techniques, so it's really great practice for glazing, lifting, and water control. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please let me know in the comments. Give it a thumbs up and make sure you're subscribed. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.